Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars. We're back at it. Today we're going to kind of continue our string odyssey. Chris and I talk about strings. Actually, not a lot, but I guess we get on the topic every now and then. And it is kind of an interesting topic. And I know strings are, there are people who talk about this crap on forums and everything else. But Chris and I were talking recently, and he kind of had a reawakening with Ernie Ball strings, right?
Well, yeah, like as far as electric guitar goes, I never really gave much of a shit about strings. I mean, I never put any thought into them.
Uh-huh.
Like, I guess when I started out, I was kind of into the GHS boomers because I don't know why. Maybe I like the package or something. And I just used those forever. And maybe occasionally something would be out of stock, so I'll try something else. And sometime in the 80s, that would have been the late 70s when I first started, that was GHS. And then sometime in the 80s, I went to the Ernie Ball, the Super Slinkies, the green package with the eagle on it, I think.
Uh-huh.
And those are great. I never had any problems with those forever and just used them consistently. And then one time in the early 2000s, using the Ernie Ball Super Slinkies, I got 2 or 3 sets in a row. I think I bought a pack. And the D string was bad in them. It wouldn't intonate. It's the weirdest thing. It must have been something in the core. So tried one, I started to think there was something wrong with my guitar because I had just one guitar then, but I traced it to the D string. So I switched to D'Addario, which is a fine string too. And I used those for up until like just a few weeks ago when I was going to change my strings for a show and I was out of a full set of D'Addario, but I had an Ernie Ball for some reason laying around here. I stuck those on, and this is on the 345. Instantly, the guitar just felt so much better feel-wise. It's like almost like I went down a gauge of strings. It was a little bit slinkier, and it just felt with that instrument, it just felt perfect. So right then, I'm like, all right, I'm switching back to Ernie Balls. My view on electric guitar strings in my personal experience, and I haven't, like I said, I haven't done a lot of experiment with that because I really don't care. It's like I put a string on, I don't think about it until I go to change them or something breaks. I had no idea that using the same gauge of strings, the feel would, change so much. So that was kind of the revelation for me. And I don't know, it was kind of like pretty amazing. It's almost like, I said this, it's almost like getting a new instrument. That guitar just felt like right. And it kind of got me thinking about, this has always been the case with me in acoustic guitars is, acoustic guitars are totally different. I mean, strings make a big difference. I mean, there's different, compositions. So, I mean, I do experiment a lot. Like if I have an acoustic guitar, I'll pick one. I don't want one too zingy, but I want, like, especially if I'm recording, I want a little bit of zing for that, for popping out of the mix. But with electric guitar strings, I just thought, it doesn't matter. You remember I think I was aware of it in the 90s. There was this myth that went around forever that all strings were made by like 1 or 2 companies.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter. And I kind of knew it was bullshit, but I may have perpetuated that too. But if you think about it, just look at the strings. They're different. I mean, they're manufactured differently and they have different components to them, ball ends and whatnot. So it doesn't make any sense. But I've become someone who went just a few weeks ago from not giving 2 shits about electric guitar strings or thinking anything about them to thinking like, wow, I wonder what these will do on this and the other instrument. So it kind of made me into kind of a believer of, like electric guitar strings do kind of matter because I hear people all the time talking about them, and I'm just like, why are they so focused on strings,
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, the moral to that story, if I was going to take a moral from there, would be like every guitar is probably different. And, finding, especially if you have a new guitar, finding that perfect marriage between this set and brand of strings, this brand and gauge of strings works with this guitar, finding that magic thing is worth going on a quest for, because like I said, there was nothing wrong with this 345 before with the D'Addarios, but honestly, it's a better guitar now for me.
That's cool.
Feel wise. So
that's pretty profound. I think that's cool. And there are some people out there that already know all this shit we're talking about, which is totally cool. But Chris and I are very much alike in terms of we kind of go down a path and we're loyalists. We stick to that. And then if for some reason something will happen and then maybe we'll try something else. But I totally agree. I think even just the way you string the guitar and then the gauges you use on different guitars. We've talked about that before too. Like, different guitars are different scale lengths, and maybe tens will feel super tight on a certain, scale length, and they'll feel really slinky on another scale length. And so I think you turned me on to that, kind of thinking about that more in terms of, okay, well, maybe on the Gretsch, I'm going to use a different kind of string, a different gauge. And then on the Les Paul, I'll use a different gauge, maybe on the Strat, different. But for me, yeah, I was a loyalist. I was a Dean Markley guy in the 80s forever. I would buy the boxes of those goddamn things. Right. And I don't even know why either. I mean, they must have worked, and maybe they just were sturdy and they lasted a long time. I think that was it. They were durable, but like you, yeah, I mean, I used Fender bullet strings back in the day and boomers and all of that crap. But yeah, I just found it interesting when you were telling me that, like when you kind of revisited Ernie Ball, because you and I have been talking about that for a while, and you had that really shitty experience with, buying several packs and going, okay, fuck this, I'm going to go use D'Addario, and you haven't had a problem with those for a long time. They were durable and they didn't break, and they weren't, they didn't have manufacturing defects when you try to intonate or stuff like that. So I thought it was interesting when you told me that you kind of had this epiphany and revisited these strings. But yeah, I'm the same way too. I you and I kind of joke about hearing all these guys that talk about like high end strings and expensive strings and stuff. But I mean, maybe there is something to that, and especially for them, if they feel like, hey, these pyramid strings, make my guitar sound the way I want it to sound. That's super cool. So, I mean, I think there is something to this, and it's player specific, and it can make a huge difference and inspire you and all that stuff. So
for me, one thing that I've learned late in my career as a hobby guitar player is, for me, more than tone is feel. Because that's where tone comes from for me. It's like, you know what, if you have a guitar that you can put in a stand and strum it and say, this sounds exactly like a 59 Burst, there's no difference. No one can tell the difference. I don't care if it doesn't feel good. I mean, that's where tone for me comes from. It's like getting the feel of the instrument going, and then your tone comes from, the way that you play it. I mean, it's like you need a feel there to be able to get what you want out of it. So that's super, super important to me, more than, just about any other thing. I mean, I don't really even focus so much. I'm not like really fussy about tone so much, which is why my gear hasn't changed in 20 years. It's like, I have good days and I have bad days where sometimes I'm like, my amp didn't sound that great tonight, and it's like, I'm not going to sell it and go look for another one. It's like, because it's delivered and I know it's capable of delivering. I mean, I still like to nerd out on stuff and collect stuff. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, get the instrument to feel the way you want it. And, the amp to feel and behave the way you want it, and the pedals to feel and behave the way you want it. And that's where tone is for me. So I don't even know what my point was with this maybe it's like looking for a string that delivers like some sort of tone or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it makes a difference on electric guitar strings, but not enough. I mean, I would never, ever change my strings if I didn't have to. I change my strings when they break, which is I think I broke a string on my Junior probably back in like 2011 or something. That's the last time I broke a string on a guitar, because I change them when I think, maybe you get like a show or two out of them, and it's like, all right, I got another show coming up, I'm going to change them. So I keep them changed. I don't change them because I think the strings are dead. I don't think I've ever experienced a dead guitar strings on a good guitar. I mean, I've seen crusty ones, and I guess you could call those dead, that have like tons of dead skin on it or something. But my own personal guitar, I've played them, my Telly's got strings on it that are probably at least 3 or 4 years old.
Damn.
And I'll record with it, and it's great. I mean, there's no crust on it. I mean, I kind of wipe it down when I'm done.
Yeah.
It sounds good. So I don't change because of strings. Like, longevity in a string isn't something that I really think about. In the acoustic guitar, maybe. But for me, at least with the Martin, it's like you have this period when you change the strings where it has this zing on the top. Sometimes it's a little annoying, but a few hours playing, it kind of tapers that. But then there's just a little bit of zing left, which is really nice for recording. And then after that, it just falls off, and it just sounds like the guitar until you change the strings. Never sounds dead. I mean, the key to acoustic guitar is get a good guitar, get a guitar that sounds great with strings that have been on it for 6 months, because that's a good guitar. You know what I mean? It's like, you may want to bring that zing back for a reason, just because it's nice sometimes. But if you have acoustic guitar, and I've learned this because from owning guitars like this, and after, a month of playing, if it sounds really thuddy and dead, it's just a shitty guitar. I mean, it's like and electric is probably like that, but it's just not so noticeable because you have an amp and you crank it. But you're right, man. People will obsess about strings. And now I get it a little bit, but it's more like, I get like the fact that strings are way more important than I ever gave them credit for, electric guitar strings. And that's kind of cool. I mean, it gives you something else to think about. And it made me want, what I want right now, thinking about this? I want a giant poster for the wall that has all the vintage string boxes on it. So through the decades and, and see how they changed and whatnot. But
dude, that'd be awesome.
I'm going to work on that. But no, strings, I'm pro string now.
Well, it's so funny because I'm the same way. It's like and I think there's probably a lot of players out there too, just like us, where we get in a rut, not necessarily a rut, but you get comfortable with all the gear you're using, and I think, another lesson is just to be mindful of trying new things, just to see what happens, buy a new pack of strings, put it on, see what happens. And I think that's a cool experiment. And I have been doing that more, like when we were getting into our bluegrass phase. This is it's tangential, but it's related, like picks, for instance. So I was going down the pick rabbit hole, and I'm doing finger picking now too. So I'm going down that rabbit hole. I bought a bunch of finger picks, and it's like it's like, I can't even tell you how awkward it is to have finger picks on and try to.
I know.
It's insane. So strings the same way. It's like I'm the same goddamn way. Like I've been using Ernie balls now for a long time. I was using D'Addario for a long time, but then for some reason I switched to Ernie balls, and I've been using Ernie balls forever now. And I like those strings. I've had good success with them. I haven't experienced what you have. I've experienced that with some other brands. I can't even remember what brands, maybe D'Addario, but where I'd get one where, you tighten it and it breaks. So you can tell it was just, okay, it's just a crappy workmanship or crappy materials or something like that. But I will say I have experienced, like, because I'm the same with you. I don't like to change strings, so I'll leave them on forever. But I do notice sometimes when I'll pick up a guitar and I'll try to tune it, it's tougher to tune if those strings are old, if they've been on my guitar for a long time. And so I'll go, okay, fuck, I better change these so I can just at least have an easier time tuning the goddamn thing. My Antigua Strat, for instance, is one that I notice it on a lot. And it could be partly the guitar, but I do know that I leave string. I'm the same way. I mean, I hate changing strings. It's a drag. And I'm still, one of the things I should get is a string winder, right? At least to make it easier. I don't even have one of those, but it's just a tedious, I hate it.
It's no fun, especially if you have cats. Trying to battle the cats while you change the strings, that's never fun. But, it stands to reason. I'm sure you could leave, if you play a guitar a lot, I mean, it is possible to wear the strings out fairly quickly to where they won't intonate, like if you get a bunch of crust and corrosion on them. Yeah. But with my guitars, the ones that aren't in super heavy rotation, I've never, I mean, like I said, the Telly's got, those are at least 3 years old on that. Yeah. One thing that always cracked me up about, strings is the debate about, like, people who are really obsessed about like string gauge, as in thinking that, like, if they went from like 9s to 10s or 10s to 11, that they're going to have Stevie Ray Vaughan tone or something like that.
Right.
And I was a victim of that. I was an avid reader of music magazines, guitar magazines back in like the all the way from the late 70s up to the 90s. And, there's like these things that you get in your head, like, fatter strings means more tone, and which is true to a certain extent. If you strum the guitar, it's going to sound fatter. The amp is going to see a little bit more, current or whatever it sees from the guitar. But at the bottom end, it's not going to make your tone any. I mean, someone that knows how to play can make, 7s sound as good as someone with like 12s on that.
Billy Gibbons, yeah.
Again, you're going back to that feel. I mean, I can wiggle chords more. If I have a perfect gauge for me where I can feel the instrument with the feel that I want, I can make the chords sound fatter and notes sound fatter because I have more control over it. And, I can finesse things out of it. But I played a Telly for a long time with 11s on it. It was no fun. And if anything, it sounded sterile compared. I mean, because I'm not playing with any life. I'm just like kind of trying to, I'm bending strings, and the bends aren't really sweet because it's like it's a little hard and unfun, or you just find yourself avoiding. I'm not going to bend up there because it's no fun.
I put 11s on my guitars, and Jesus Christ, I was so miserable. Yeah, exactly. It's like I didn't even want to play my guitars because it's like, fuck.
And he was like 14s or some shit. So and
and I have small hands, and so it's like for me, so it was a short-lived experiment for me. It's like, okay, and like you say, I mean, I'm sure there are some physics involved with these big piano strings and how they sound, but the bottom line too is he tuned down a half step, so that helped him a ton,
and he also knew how to play, which helped him. And it's like anything, there's going to be a grain of truth to it. But the thing that's so funny is you put all these big fat ass strings on your guitar and you get it sounding really good, and then you go to record a track and suddenly you're high passing everything and cutting out all these frequencies because it's taking up too much. It's no different live. If you've got all this like massive like bottom end and all this shit, it's like it's mud. Yeah. I mean, just find that place where your guitar sits. And I mean, you can get there with, it's funny. Another little tangent is you have like the two string guys. There's two guys that come up in string conversations on either end of the spectrum. First of all, there's Stevie Ray Vaughan when you're trying to be a proponent of big strings. And then there's Billy Gibbons when you're trying to be a proponent of small strings, because he used like 7 or something. But somewhere between those two, is you, where it's something where you can find the happy medium and get to that place where it's just great. And my guitars right now, I mean, I have an array of string gauges on my guitars right now. For a while, I'm like, I'm going to be 10s on Gibsons and 9s on Fenders. And I had a really hard time doing 9s on Fenders. They just seemed too rubbery for me. I left them on and made myself get used to that. And I'm so glad I did, because it's that classic Telly thing now that you can get, because you can do those, pedal steel bends and all that stuff. So,
and those are 9?
9s on the Fenders now, and I have 10s on the Gibsons, except for the Paul. I have 9.5s on there because that has really low frets, and there's a little bit, so I needed a little less tension to be able to bend on the wood, because I'm touching wood there. But
that's cool. Yeah. Well, it made me think about too. That's exactly right. I mean, somewhere in that spectrum, that's where you are, and it's all right. And you can get tons of tone still, regardless of what gauge strings you use. Billy Gibbons has a whole story about that when, B.B. King picked up his guitar and said, what the hell are you doing playing these heavy strings? It's like, and B.B. King is known for his tone, distinct tone, right? Not only his style, but his tone. And it made me think about like Robbie Robertson back in the early, when there wasn't a lot of options for guitar players in terms of gauges or strings, and he was using banjo strings.
Yeah, a lot of people did. Yeah.
Because he wanted to be able to bend and stuff like that. And so we have it pretty good these days in terms of like our options as guitar players, because now we've got, like you were saying, there's 9.5s, there's heavy bottom, light top, like all kinds of stuff that we can, experiment with and find our own little niche. And like you're saying, I think guitar players by and large are feel players. Like, the guitar has to feel right when you're playing chords and when you're bending and all that crap. I'm the same way. It's like, if it doesn't feel right, then I feel like I can't play.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing to think about, is like, we have so many options now that, poor early guitar players, it's like, okay, well, I guess I got to go find a banjo string or some weird amalgamation of cobbled together wire to make my guitar the way I need it,
And they did it, and they got to work, and they made all this great stuff, and they weren't on the forums going, what do you think about banjo strings? I'm thinking about using a banjo string.
Can you imagine? Oh my God. Well, there was back then, there was just this word of mouth network of musicians and techs and guys probably, helping each other out or dissing you, or, like some tech could get your guitar and go, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like, anyway, but yeah, so I think it's cool that you kind of came to this new realization. And again, like, we're not proselytizers or anything, but when Chris and I kind of come up on these things, it makes us want to share it with other people and just remind you, hey, try new shit. Like, we have so many options available to us now as guitar players. Go try something new. Try a new gauge. Try stringing your guitar. I tried some of my guitars. I string, that weird way where you're wrapping over the tailpiece, kind of like a junior.
Oh, I do that on my Gibsons. Yeah.
And it does feel slinkier to me. It's cool. So try these different things and see if it inspires you, see if it helps you play better, see if it feels better on your guitar,
I just had this thought that I changed to Ernie Balls and had this experience that's changed my life for a while. But what if they accidentally put a 9-gauge set in the 10-gauge package? You know what I mean? Like the factory or something. I'll have to wait and do my next string change before I know for sure. It's weird because it feels like, no, they actually feel that like the same diameter on the neck. It's just, they're just a little bit rubbery. I mean, a little bit more rubbery. It's kind of like the difference between a Les Paul Standard and a Les Paul Junior, both with 10s on it. Yeah. The Junior is just slinkier. It's because of the wraparound, the way it is. And it just, the scale links are identical. So it's not that. It's just the way that gentle wraparound. I don't know the physics behind that, but it just seems a little slinkier. And that's what I was looking for. I mean, I'm back to like bending up higher on the neck and everything else.
It's hilarious that your cynicism made you think that it was the wrong gauge in the 10-pack.
Wading through the myths and all this stuff is really hard. And my approach to that is like, I never want to like just assume that, a handful of personal experiences is like the workings of the universe, like that everything, I do for my own personal self, take my experiences and try to, note things from them. And, there's things like with strings, like there's these rules that you'll come across, like, to only wrap the string 3 times around a post or something like that, or the fewest times possible. And it's like, and that isn't even like a realistic thing. If you look at like some of the Gibson tuners, they're super tall. Yeah. And if you went 3 wraps, it would be not even sitting in the nut.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, more than, be anal about the amount of wraps you go around there. Be anal about just pulling the slack out of it. I thought of this when you mentioned B.B. King, because he used to wrap the entire string around the post and he just pulled the slack out. It's physics. So, I mean, the string doesn't know if it's 3 or 4 wraps. It's like with 4 wraps, you have more chance of putting slack in there. With 6 wraps, you have more chance. So if you do a lot of wraps, just pull harder and just make sure that you have the slack out of it and you won't have any problems with the amount of wraps that you do.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, you and I kind of talked about that before too, the weird little rabbit knot that.
Yeah, people still do that and they swear by it and they'll swear up and down, and that's fine. If you want to do that, that's great. And I don't care anymore because I don't do guitar tech work anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't have to deal with that. The only reason I can care about that, and we're talking about how you push, I forget how it goes. You push the string through the hole, and then some sort of knot, and then go over, and but usually the string breaks at that knot, and you're sitting there with pliers trying to get the knot off. And it used to bug me because I used to, do setups and stuff, and now I don't care. But it's unnecessary.
It used to bug me too, because just taking your strings off, undoing that fucking knot, depending on which string you're on, is a pain in the ass. And then you're like, and then you just, in our conversation, you're like, well, dude, the string is bent at a 90-degree angle once it goes. It's like, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's just not. It's like, and that's exactly true. And I thought about it, and it's like, yeah, you're right. It's like once you put it through there and you start winding it, it's like it's not going to go anywhere. But I think you're right. I mean, stretching your strings I'm bad at that too. And I need to get better at it, is really stretching my strings and letting them sit on the guitar long enough and stretch them so that they do stretch out enough. And so that when you're playing it and you're tuning it,
or even just changing the terminology from stretching your strings, which I always thought like the strings like actually stretch, they get longer. No, it's like pulling the slack out.
Yeah,
Once
that's right.
You're pulling the slack out, just having that visual thing. Exactly. And like, applying that to, okay, this guitar, I had to do like 8 wraps or, 5 wraps or something on this. So I'm going to make extra sure I pull all that slack out of there, and that'll get, It's all about physics. But I say that, but I'm as superstitious and like traditional as any guitar player out there. There's all this like I attribute mojo to like bullshit stuff and stuff. So I'm not going to fault anybody for that. But
it's the world we live in, man. We live in a world of mojo and science, and that's the guitar world. That's the music world, really. Well, what did we learn today, man?
We learned to change your strings.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Unless you're Chris and you just leave them on there for 3 years and you don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Just try some new strings.
Change your string brand.
Change is good. Sometimes it can be bad. And then
there's also that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which I was in for years with Diodario's because I didn't know it was broke. Or it wasn't broke, but it got fixed in a new and delightful way with a change.
That's hilarious. Yeah, well, I guess there's those messages apply to anybody, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But by the same token, try new things, and you might be pleasantly surprised. Hopefully, cool. As always, thanks for listening, everybody out there. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Like us, give us thumbs up, and we'll continue on. Any last words, Chris?
No, just play guitar.
Oh, I like that.
You like that?
Right, until next time.
Bye.
Bye.